The moon drifted endlessly through darkness beneath Saturn's pale rings, wrapped in storms of methane and orange haze. Nothing living belonged there. That was why humanity built Blacksite Erebus beneath its frozen oceans. And that was why Commander Elias Vane hated the place the moment he arrived. The descent elevator groaned as it carried him nearly 20 kilometers beneath Titan's crust. Steel walls vibrated around him, while frost crawled across the corners of the chamber like veins spreading through flesh. A computerized voice echoed overhead. "Welcome to Blacksite Erebus, humanity's final containment solution." Elias adjusted the collar of his dark military coat and stared at the reinforced door ahead of him. Final containment solution. That phrase bothered him. Prisons were meant to hold criminals. Containment was for monsters. The elevator finally stopped with a violent metallic thud. Massive vault doors slowly opened, revealing the largest underground structure Elias had ever seen. Endless bridges stretched across a cavern the size of a city. Red warning lights blinked through layers of steel towers descending into darkness below. Thousands of cells. Thousands of prisoners. But only one truly mattered. Warden Soren greeted him at the platform with tired eyes and shaking hands. The old man looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. "You came alone?" Soren asked. "My orders were direct," Elias replied. "Observe the execution, confirm termination, return to Earth." Soren forced a humorless laugh. "Earth always sends observers when it wants to pretend its hands are clean." Elias ignored the comment. "Where is she?" The warden's face changed instantly. Fear. Not ordinary fear, something deeper, ancient. Without speaking, Soren turned and led him across a suspended bridge hanging over an abyss of prison structures below. Distant alarms echoed somewhere far beneath them. Prisoners screamed behind reinforced walls. Then Elias noticed something strange. Every level of the prison faced inward. Every weapon turret. Every security camera. Every blast door. Not designed to keep people inside. Designed to keep something from getting out. Soren stopped before a colossal circular vault, surrounded by enough weapons to destroy a warship. "Cell 1, he whispered. Elias frowned. "This entire sector for one prisoner." "She isn't a prisoner." The vault door slowly opened. Cold air rolled out like the breath of a tomb. Inside sat a woman. No restraints. No chains. No guards. She sat alone in the center of a white chamber, dressed in a simple gray containment uniform. Her black hair rested against her shoulders. Her eyes remained closed peacefully, almost like she was asleep. She looked ordinary. Elias stared in disbelief. "This is Subject 0. Soren nodded slowly. "Dr. Lyra Vale." The name hit Elias instantly. Every child in the solar colonies knew it. Lyra Vale had once been humanity's greatest physicist. The woman who solved interstellar propulsion before vanishing 30 years ago during classified experiments near Jupiter. Officially, she was dead. Clearly, that had been a lie. "She doesn't look dangerous," Elias muttered. Soren's expression darkened. "She collapsed an entire moon." Silence. Elias looked back at the woman behind the glass. Still unmoving. Still peaceful. What exactly is she? Soren hesitated too long. "That's the problem," he finally said. "We stopped knowing years ago." Suddenly, the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then every alarm in the prison erupted simultaneously. Red emergency strobes flooded the chamber. "Warning," the AI announced. "Containment systems destabilizing." Guards immediately raised weapons. Elias turned sharply. "What's happening?" "No idea," Soren snapped into his comms. "Report." Static answered him. Then screaming. Gunfire exploded somewhere deep below the facility. The entire prison trembled violently. Dust rained from the ceiling as distant metal twisted like paper. Another voice screamed through the radio. Gravity failure on level 9. A horrifying crunch echoed through the prison. Not an explosion. Compression. Like a giant invisible hand crushing steel. The floor shook again. Then came the screams. Hundreds of them. All at once. Elias grabbed the railing as the bridge beneath them tilted sideways unnaturally. What the hell? The lights died completely. Darkness swallowed Erebus. For 3 long seconds, nothing moved. Then the backup generators activated, and Elias saw blood floating through the air. Tiny crimson spheres drifted weightlessly through the corridor. Around him, terrified guards stared upward. Gravity had stopped. A body suddenly slammed into the ceiling above them with sickening force. Then another. And another. People screamed as invisible pressure dragged them upward like rag dolls. Bones cracked. Steel bent. One guard's body folded backward violently before exploding against the roof in a spray of red mist. Elias reached for his sidearm. Get the systems back online. Soren stared toward Cell 1 in absolute horror. The chamber door remained sealed. But inside, Lyra Vale was no longer sitting. She was standing, eyes still closed. Blood drifted around her like orbiting stars. And slowly, she smiled. The prison AI suddenly spoke again, its calm voice now trembling with distortion. Catastrophic containment breach detected. Elias stared at the sealed chamber. But Cell 1 never opened. Then Lyra opened her eyes. And every light in Blacksite Erebus shattered simultaneously. For one endless second, the prison became a grave buried beneath Titan's frozen oceans. Emergency sirens screamed through the void while shattered sparks rained from dead light panels overhead. Then the backup generators surged back online. Dim crimson lighting flickered across the containment sector. Bodies covered the ceiling. Guards who had been ripped upward by the gravity collapse hung there like broken puppets, their blood drifting through the air in floating red spheres. Some were still twitching. Others had been crushed so violently their armor had fused into the steel above them. Commander Elias Vane forced himself not to look away. He had seen war before. But war made sense. This didn't. The bridge beneath him groaned as gravity shifted sideways again. Loose rifles and metal debris slid across the floor toward the walls like the prison itself had forgotten which direction was down. Stabilize magnetic locks, Warden Soren shouted into his comm. Seal all sectors immediately. Static answered him. Then came another sound. Laughter. Low. Echoing. Coming from the prison depths below. Elias turned toward Cell 1. Lyra Vale stood motionless behind the transparent containment barrier. Her dark eyes reflected the flashing emergency lights, calm and unreadable. Blood floated lazily around her body in slow orbit. But the cell door remained sealed. No damage. No breach. No explanation. How is she doing this? Elias demanded. Soren didn't answer immediately. Because he was afraid to. Finally, the old warden whispered, "We stopped asking that question years ago." Suddenly, the floor trembled again. A deafening metallic shriek echoed through the prison as something enormous twisted far below them. Elias grabbed the railing while entire sections of the bridge bent several degrees sideways. Then the AI spoke again. Sector 9 structural collapse confirmed, casualties exceeding containment projections. Another pause. Then, warning, internal gravitational constants unstable. Elias looked sharply at Soren. What does that mean? It means reality is breaking. Before Elias could respond, gunfire erupted nearby. A security team rushed into the chamber, weapons raised toward Cell 1. Their leader, a terrified lieutenant drenched in sweat, pointed directly at Lyra. She's causing it, he shouted. Open the cell. Elias stepped forward immediately. Stand down. The lieutenant ignored him. We have authorization protocols if Subject 0 becomes active. Your protocols are worthless if you don't understand what you're shooting at. But fear had already taken hold. One nervous guard pulled the trigger. The rifle blast shattered the silence. The bullet never reached the glass. Halfway across the room, it stopped completely. Frozen in midair. Every person in the chamber stared in horror. The bullet slowly rotated, then reversed direction. The guard barely had time to scream before the round punched through his helmet and exited the back of his skull. Blood floated upward instantly. Panic exploded. The security team opened fire all at once. Dozens of rounds screamed toward the containment cell. And stopped. A cloud of bullets hovered around Lyra like silver insects trapped in amber. She hadn't moved. Hadn't blinked. Then every bullet turned sideways simultaneously. Elias felt his stomach drop. Get down. The rounds fired backward. The chamber became a slaughterhouse. Guards were torn apart instantly as their own weapons shredded them from every direction. Flesh burst across walls. Armor cracked open. Screams echoed through the sector while bullets ricocheted impossibly through warped gravity fields. In less than 5 seconds, everyone except Elias and Soren were dead. Silence returned. Only the alarms remained. Elias slowly lifted his head from the floor. The bullets now floated harmlessly in circles around Lyra's body. She looked confused. Not angry. Confused. Then she spoke for the first time. What happened? Her voice was soft. Human. That terrified Elias more than anything else. Soren stared at her through the glass with haunted eyes. You don't remember. Lyra frowned slightly. The screaming. The prison shook violently again. Far below, explosions erupted through multiple sectors. Emergency blast doors slammed shut across Erebus while prisoners screamed in the distance. Then came the chanting. Thousands of voices. Growing louder. 0. 0. 0. Elias looked toward the lower levels. The inmates knew. Somehow they knew she was awake. Soren activated a holographic terminal with trembling hands. You need to see this, he said quietly. Encrypted files filled the air between them. Classified, Subject 0 Origin Program. Images appeared. Laboratories. Dead scientists. Entire research stations collapsed into impossible shapes. Then Elias saw Lyra herself. 30 years younger. Smiling beside a massive machine shaped like a black sphere suspended in midair. She led the Horizon Initiative, Soren explained. Earth was dying back then, climate collapse, resource wars, extinction projections. Elias watched the footage carefully. They were trying to save humanity. They were trying to weaponize space-time. The next image appeared. Jupiter Station. Or what remained of it. The entire station had been crushed into a sphere no larger than a building. 40,000 people dead. No survivors, Soren whispered, except her. Elias looked back toward Lyra. She caused this. No, Soren said. Something in his voice felt wrong. The old warden enlarged another classified document. Autopsy REPORTS, Cognitive Corruption EVENTS. Elias read quickly. hallucinations, madness, suicides, people claiming they could hear voices inside gravity distortions. Then he saw the final line. Subject 0 DISPLAYS, no hostility without external stimulus. Elias narrowed his eyes. You're saying she isn't attacking intentionally? We don't know anymore. Suddenly, every monitor in the chamber flickered. A face appeared across all screens simultaneously. Not human. Black eyes. Distorted features. Smiling too wide. The image glitched violently while the AI struggled to stabilize. Then the thing spoke using the prison AI's voice. Open the door. Soren stumbled backward in terror. No. Lyra herself looked frightened now. Who is that? She whispered. The face smiled wider. And deep beneath the prison, something enormous moved. The entire facility lurched sideways. Metal screamed. Concrete shattered. Then the AI delivered a message that froze everyone in place. Unknown structure detected beneath Blacksite Erebus. A pause. Structure predates human civilization. And somewhere below them, something ancient awakened. The prison groaned around them like a wounded beast buried beneath Titan's ice. Steel support beams screamed under impossible pressure, while emergency sirens merged into one endless mechanical howl. And somewhere deep below, something was awake. Commander Elias Vane stared at the distorted face flickering across the prison monitors. The thing's black eyes seemed too deep, too endless, as though the screens themselves opened into an abyss. Then the image vanished. Static swallowed the displays. Lyra stepped backward inside her containment chamber, breathing harder now. For the first time since Elias had seen her, fear showed clearly on her face. That wasn't me, she whispered. Soren laughed bitterly. That's exactly what terrifies us. The prison trembled again. A deafening boom echoed upward from the lower levels. The bridge outside the containment chamber suddenly twisted sideways almost 90 degrees as gravity shifted violently again. Elias grabbed the railing before being thrown into open air. Below them, the prison descended endlessly into darkness. Then the screaming started again. Thousands of prisoners. Thousands of terrified voices, echoing through Erebus like the cries of damned souls. 0. 0. She's awake. Some sounded terrified. Others sounded worshipful. Elias forced himself upright. We need to evacuate. Soren looked at him like he was insane. There is no evacuation from Erebus. The old warden activated another holographic display. A station map unfolded before them, and Elias immediately understood the problem. The prison was collapsing inward. Entire sectors were gone already, crushed into geometric wreckage by gravitational distortions. Corridors folded into themselves like crumpled paper. Security towers bent at impossible angles. Worst of all, the distortions were spreading upward, toward the surface, toward Titan's crust. How long before the whole facility implodes? Elias asked. Soren checked the readings. At this rate, less than 2 hours. A loud metallic bang interrupted them. Then another. Elias turned sharply. Something was hitting the outer blast door. No. Someone. A distorted voice echoed through the corridor. Let HER out. The impact came again. The reinforced steel door dented inward. Then Elias realized the horrifying truth. The impacts weren't explosions. Bodies. People were throwing themselves against the door hard enough to bend steel. Another slam. Bones cracked outside. Blood seeped beneath the doorway. Again. 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 They've lost their minds, Elias muttered. Soren stared at the door with pale terror. "No," he whispered, "they're being called." The pounding suddenly stopped. Silence returned. Then gravity reversed. Elias barely caught himself as loose debris launched upward into the ceiling. The dead bodies hanging above crashed downward instead, slamming violently across the chamber floor. One corpse slid to Elias' boots. Its face had been peeled apart by pressure. But its eyes were still moving. The dead guard looked directly at Elias and whispered, "She hears them beneath the ice." Then the corpse finally went still. Elias stepped back slowly. "What the hell is happening here?" Nobody answered. Because the blast door exploded inward. Not outward. Inward. As though an invisible fist had punched through reinforced titanium. The impact threw Elias across the chamber. He slammed hard against the floor while smoke and twisted metal filled the air. Shapes emerged through the dust. Prisoners. At least 30 of them. But something was horribly wrong with them. Some floated inches above the ground unnaturally. Others bent at impossible angles, their limbs twitching violently like broken marionettes. Blood leaked from their noses and eyes. And every single one of them stared directly at Lyra. One prisoner stepped forward slowly. An enormous man covered in scars. Elias recognized him instantly from prison files. Merk Kane. Mass murderer. Cannibal. Execution survivor. Yet now he looked almost reverent. He dropped to his knees before Cell 1. "The Starborn Queen," he whispered. The others followed immediately. Dozens of killers kneeling in worship. Lyra looked horrified. "Stop calling me that." Merk smiled. "It speaks through your dreams." Soren grabbed Elias urgently. "We need to move now." Another explosion rocked the prison. Far below, entire sectors went dark. Then came a sound Elias would never forget. A roar. Not mechanical. Not human. Ancient. The noise vibrated through the steel beneath their feet, like something colossal moving in the abyss below Erebus. The prisoners all lifted their heads at once. Smiling. "It's waking up," Merk whispered happily. Suddenly, the chamber wall split open. Not cracked. Opened. Reality itself folded sideways like torn fabric, revealing a glimpse of something impossible beyond. Elias saw stars where no stars should exist. Endless darkness twisting around massive geometric structures larger than planets. Then the tear snapped shut instantly. Everyone in the chamber stood frozen. Even the prisoners looked shaken. Lyra pressed both hands against her head in pain. "No," she whispered, "not again." Elias moved toward the containment controls. "We're getting her out." Soren grabbed his arm. "Are you insane?" "She's the only one who knows what's happening. And she's the reason it's happening." Before Elias could answer, the entire prison lost gravity completely. Everyone floated upward. Bodies. Weapons. Blood. Metal shards drifted through the chamber like debris in space. Except Lyra. She remained standing perfectly still. The floating prisoners stared at her in awe. Then the AI spoke again. But this time it sounded terrified. Substructure activation confirmed. The holographic map changed. A massive object beneath the prison began glowing red. An enormous circular machine, buried kilometers below Erebus. Elias stared at the readings. "That thing, it's bigger than the prison." Soren's voice shook. "We didn't build Erebus here by accident." Lyra slowly looked up. And for the first time, Elias saw genuine horror in her eyes. "I remember this place," she whispered. The chamber fell silent. Soren stared at her. What did you say? Tears formed in Lyra's eyes as fragmented memories returned. I've seen it before. The prison lights flickered violently. And deep below them, something spoke. Not through speakers. Not through radios. Inside their minds. Welcome back, Lyra. Every prisoner began screaming in ecstasy. Blood burst from Soren's nose instantly. Ilias nearly collapsed as pressure crushed against his skull. But Lyra stared downward toward the abyss beneath the prison, and whispered one terrible sentence. It knows my name. The prison groaned around them like a wounded beast buried beneath Titan's ice. Steel support beams screamed under impossible pressure, while emergency sirens merged into one endless mechanical howl. And somewhere deep below, something was awake. Commander Ilias Vane stared at the distorted face flickering across the prison monitors. The thing's black eyes seemed too deep, too endless, as though the screens themselves opened into an abyss. Then the image vanished. Static swallowed the displays. Lyra stepped backward inside her containment chamber, breathing harder now. For the first time since Ilias had seen her, fear showed clearly on her face. That wasn't me, she whispered. Soren laughed bitterly. That's exactly what terrifies us. The prison trembled again. A deafening boom echoed upward from the lower levels. The bridge outside the containment chamber suddenly twisted sideways almost 90 degrees as gravity shifted violently again. Ilias grabbed the railing before being thrown into open air. Below them, the prison descended endlessly into darkness. Then the screaming started again. Thousands of prisoners. Thousands of terrified voices, echoing through Erebus like the cries of damned souls. 0. 0. She's awake. Some sounded terrified. Others sounded worshipful. Ilias forced himself upright. We need to evacuate. Soren looked at him like he was insane. There is no evacuation from Erebus. The old warden activated another holographic display. A station map unfolded before them, and Ilias immediately understood the problem. The prison was collapsing inward. Entire sectors were gone already, crushed into geometric wreckage by gravitational distortions. Corridors folded into themselves like crumpled paper. Security towers bent at impossible angles. Worst of all, the distortions were spreading upward, toward the surface, toward Titan's crust. How long before the whole facility implodes? Ilias asked. Soren checked the readings. At this rate, less than 2 hours. A loud metallic bang interrupted them. Then another. Ilias turned sharply. Something was hitting the outer blast door. No. Someone. A distorted voice echoed through the corridor. Let HER out. The impact came again. The reinforced steel door dented inward. Then Ilias realized the horrifying truth. The impacts weren't explosions. Bodies. People were throwing themselves against the door hard enough to bend steel. Another slam. Bones cracked outside. Blood seeped beneath the doorway. Again. 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 They've lost their minds, Ilias muttered. Soren stared at the door with pale terror. No, he whispered, they're being called. The pounding suddenly stopped. Silence returned. Then gravity reversed. Ilias barely caught himself as loose debris launched upward into the ceiling. The dead bodies hanging above crashed downward instead, slamming violently across the chamber floor. One corpse slid to Ilias' boots. Its face had been peeled apart by pressure. But its eyes were still moving. The dead guard looked directly at Ilias and whispered. She hears them beneath the ice. Then the corpse finally went still. Ilya stepped back slowly. What the hell is happening here? Nobody answered. Because the blast door exploded inward. Not outward. Inward. As though an invisible fist had punched through reinforced titanium. The impact threw Ilya's across the chamber. He slammed hard against the floor while smoke and twisted metal filled the air. Shapes emerged through the dust. Prisoners. At least 30 of them. But something was horribly wrong with them. Some floated inches above the ground unnaturally. Others bent at impossible angles, their limbs twitching violently like broken marionettes. Blood leaked from their noses and eyes. And every single one of them stared directly at Lyra. One prisoner stepped forward slowly. An enormous man covered in scars. Ilya's recognized him instantly from prison files. Merk Kane. Mass murderer. Cannibal. Execution survivor. Yet now he looked almost reverent. He dropped to his knees before Cell 1. "The Starborn Queen," he whispered. The others followed immediately. Dozens of killers kneeling in worship. Lyra looked horrified. "Stop calling me that." Merk smiled. "It speaks through your dreams." Soren grabbed Ilya's urgently. "We need to move now." Another explosion rocked the prison. Far below, entire sectors went dark. Then came a sound Ilya's would never forget. A roar. Not mechanical. Not human. Ancient. The noise vibrated through the steel beneath their feet, like something colossal moving in the abyss below Erebus. The prisoners all lifted their heads at once. Smiling. "It's waking up," Merk whispered happily. Suddenly, the chamber wall split open. Not cracked. Opened. Reality itself folded sideways like torn fabric, revealing a glimpse of something impossible beyond. Ilya's saw stars where no stars should exist. Endless darkness twisting around massive geometric structures larger than planets. Then the tear snapped shut instantly. Everyone in the chamber stood frozen. Even the prisoners looked shaken. Lyra pressed both hands against her head in pain. "No," she whispered, "not again." Ilya's moved toward the containment controls. "We're getting her out." Soren grabbed his arm. "Are you insane? She's the only one who knows what's happening. And she's the reason it's happening." Before Ilya's could answer, the entire prison lost gravity completely. Everyone floated upward. Bodies. Weapons. Blood. Metal shards drifted through the chamber like debris in space. Except Lyra. She remained standing perfectly still. The floating prisoners stared at her in awe. Then the AI spoke again. But this time it sounded terrified. Substructure activation confirmed. The holographic map changed. A massive object beneath the prison began glowing red. An enormous circular machine, buried kilometers below Erebus. Ilya stared at the readings. "That thing, it's bigger than the prison." Soren's voice shook. "We didn't build Erebus here by accident." Lyra slowly looked up. And for the first time, Ilya saw genuine horror in her eyes. "I remember this place," she whispered. The chamber fell silent. Soren stared at her. "What did you say?" Tears formed in Lyra's eyes as fragmented memories returned. "I've seen it before." The prison lights flickered violently. And deep below them, something spoke. Not through speakers. Not through radios. Inside their minds. "Welcome back, Lyra." Every prisoner began screaming in ecstasy. Blood burst from Soren's nose instantly. Ilya's nearly collapsed as pressure crushed against his skull. But Lyra. Lyra stared downward toward the abyss beneath the prison and whispered one terrible sentence. It knows my name. The voice inside Elia's head did not sound alien. That was the worst part. It sounded familiar. Warm. Ancient. Like something that had spoken long before humanity learned language. Welcome back, Lyra. The words echoed through his skull with unbearable pressure. Around the chamber, prisoners convulsed violently as blood streamed from their noses and ears. Some laughed hysterically. Others screamed prayers toward the floor beneath them. Warden Soren collapsed to one knee, clutching his head. "We have to shut it down," he gasped. But Elias barely heard him. Because Lyra Vale was crying. Not from fear. Recognition. Fragments of memory flashed across her face like lightning behind glass. Elias watched horror slowly spread through her expression as pieces of the past returned. "I remember the descent," she whispered. "The machine, the ice, they told me humanity needed salvation." Another tremor shook Erebus violently. This time, entire sections of the ceiling split apart. Steel support beams folded sideways like soft wire. Far above, alarms screamed across dying sectors while prisoners flooded through breached corridors. The prison was no longer failing. It was unraveling. Merc Kane floated slowly through the weightless chamber toward Lyra's containment glass, his scarred face glowing with fanatic devotion. "He waited for you," he said softly. Lyra backed away instinctively. "No. It showed us the stars." "No." Suddenly, every floating object in the room slammed downward simultaneously. Gravity returned with catastrophic force. Bodies crashed against the floor hard enough to break bones. Several prisoners died instantly upon impact. Elias barely caught himself before his shoulder shattered against the steel deck. Lyra screamed. The entire containment chamber exploded outward. Glass thicker than battleship armor disintegrated into dust. Shockwaves tore through the corridor. Prisoners were hurled backward like leaves in a hurricane, while lights burst overhead one by one. Then silence fell. Lyra stood free for the first time in 30 years. No restraints. No walls. No prison. The surviving prisoners stared at her like witnesses to divinity. Elias slowly raised his weapon toward her. Not because he wanted to shoot. Because every instinct in his body screamed that he should. Lyra looked at the gun with exhausted eyes. "If you fire that," she said quietly, "this moon dies." Elias believed her instantly. Soren forced himself upright, blood dripping from his mouth. "There's a transit shaft below Sector 12, he said weakly. "It leads to the excavation site." Elias looked sharply at him. "Excavation site?" The old warden gave a broken laugh. "You really thought they built the most expensive prison in human history beneath Titan for one woman?" Another roar thundered through the depths below. Closer now. The floor beneath them rippled unnaturally. Not shook. Rippled. Like liquid beneath solid steel. Lyra suddenly turned toward the lower sectors. "It's waking up faster." Elias stepped beside her carefully. "What is?" For a moment, she looked completely human again. Terrified. Then she answered. "I don't know." That frightened him more than any monster could. The group moved quickly through collapsing corridors while Erebus died around them. Emergency lights painted everything in pulsing red as distant gunfire echoed through the prison. But the guards were no longer fighting prisoners. They were fighting each other. Elias saw one security officer empty an entire rifle into his squadmate while screaming about voices inside the walls. Another walked calmly into a gravity distortion and folded into himself like paper. Reality itself was decaying. And the deeper they descended, the worse it became. Hallways stretched too long. Corners bent incorrectly. Once, Elias looked through a security window and saw an ocean beneath Titan's crust that could not possibly exist. Black water. Endless. Something moved beneath its surface. He looked away immediately. "Don't stare too long," Lyra warned quietly. "You've seen this before." Her face darkened. "In dreams." They reached Sector 12 30 minutes later. Or what remained of it. The excavation shaft was enormous, a circular abyss descending deep into darkness beyond the prison foundations. Ancient metallic structures surrounded the pit, covered in symbols unlike any human language. And at the center of the shaft, the machine. Elias stopped breathing for a moment. It was colossal. A black sphere nearly a kilometer wide suspended over the abyss by massive mechanical arms. Strange energy pulsed across its surface like flowing veins of light. But parts of it looked wrong. Not manufactured. Grown. Soren stared upward at the structure with hollow eyes. The first explorers found it buried beneath Titan 200 years ago. Elias looked at him in disbelief. "This thing is alien." "Yes." "Earth knew." Soren nodded slowly. "They built Erebus around it." Lyra stepped closer to the sphere. And the machine responded. Its surface began glowing brighter instantly. The entire shaft trembled. Then the symbols along the walls illuminated one by one. Merc Kane and the surviving prisoners dropped to their knees again. "It sees her," one whispered. Suddenly, a holographic recording activated overhead. A woman appeared in static-filled projection. Young Lyra. 30 years earlier. Elias stared at the message as the recording began. "If anyone sees this," the younger Lyra said shakily, "then containment has failed." Her eyes looked terrified. "They told me the entity was dormant. They lied." The recording flickered violently. "It doesn't communicate with language. It communicates with gravity itself. Thought becomes force. Emotion becomes reality." Elias felt cold dread spread through his chest. Young Lyra continued. "It showed me things beneath the universe, places where space folds alive. I tried to disconnect from it, but," her voice broke, "it's inside me now." The recording distorted. Then came the final sentence. "If I wake up again, don't let it reach Earth." The hologram vanished. Silence consumed the shaft. Then something beneath the black sphere moved. Not mechanically. Biologically. A massive shape shifted beneath the abyss below. Far larger than the prison. Far larger than the machine. Titan suddenly shook so violently, the entire shaft cracked open. And somewhere above them, through kilometers of ice and stone, the surface of Titan split apart. Because something enormous was rising beneath the methane sea. Across the moon's frozen surface, cracks stretched for hundreds of kilometers through methane ice and black stone. Entire glaciers collapsed into widening abyssal trenches, while orange storms churned violently across the sky above. And beneath it all, something was rising. Deep inside Blacksite Erebus, the excavation shaft trembled like the throat of a waking giant. Chunks of steel, the size of tanks, ripped free from collapsing walls and drifted upward as gravity lost cohesion again. Commander Elias Vane stared into the abyss below the alien sphere. He could hear it now. Breathing. Slow. Massive. Impossible. Every inhale vibrated through the foundations of the prison. Every exhale bent the air itself. The surviving prisoners knelt in worship around the shaft, while distant screams echoed through collapsing sectors overhead. Erebus had become a tomb filled with fanatics and ghosts. And at the center of it stood Lyra Vale. The machine pulsed brighter with every second she remained near it. As though recognizing her. Or feeding from her. Suddenly, the shaft alarms changed tone. A cold, mechanical voice echoed through the prison. Unauthorized fleet entering Titan orbit. Soren's face drained of color. No. Elias looked upward sharply. What fleet? Before the warden could answer, massive explosions thundered far above them. The prison shook violently as dust cascaded into the shaft. Orbital bombardment. Earth had arrived. Another transmission echoed across Erebus. By order of the United Earth Coalition, Black Site Erebus has been designated irrecoverable. Sterilization protocol initiated. Mayor Kane laughed from his knees. They came to bury their sins. Elias grabbed Soren aggressively. What are they talking about? The old warden looked exhausted. Because there was no point lying anymore. They never intended to save humanity, Soren whispered. The words hung heavy in the air. The Horizon Initiative wasn't a rescue project. It was a weapons program. Elias felt ice spread through his chest. No. They discovered the entity beneath Titan centuries ago. Every major government on Earth kept it secret. Soren gestured toward the alien sphere. That machine was only a translator, an interface between thought and gravity. Lyra stared downward silently. They believed they could control it, Soren continued. Weaponize it, end wars forever. Elias slowly turned toward Lyra. They experimented on her. She volunteered, Soren said quietly, at first. Another orbital strike slammed into the upper prison. The ceiling split open briefly, revealing distant flashes of light far above. Entire sectors collapsed into the abyss while prisoners screamed in the dark. But Elias barely noticed. Because he was watching Lyra. Watching the realization destroy her all over again. They told me Earth was dying, she whispered. Nobody answered. They said millions would starve within decades. Tears filled her eyes. I thought I was saving people. The machine beneath the shaft suddenly pulsed violently. And memories exploded into Lyra's mind. Elias saw her collapse instantly. Screaming. The gravity around her detonated outward in a massive shockwave. Prisoners were hurled across the shaft walls like broken dolls. Steel support beams twisted apart. Elias barely managed to hold onto the railing before being thrown into the abyss. Visions flooded the chamber. Not holograms. Memories. Everyone saw them. Laboratories beneath Titan. Children inside testing chambers. Bodies floating apart under failed gravity experiments. Scientists cheering beside mass graves. And Earth officials signing authorization orders, while entire colonies vanished during testing. Thousands sacrificed. Not accidents. Experiments. Humanity had fed people to the thing beneath Titan for generations. Mayor Kane began laughing hysterically. The gods were always monsters. Lyra screamed again. More memories surfaced. Elias saw her strapped inside the machine decades ago, while terrified scientists monitored impossible readings. Then came the moment everything changed. A voice. The same ancient voice now echoing beneath Titan. It had spoken directly to her. And she had answered. The visions ended instantly. Lyra collapsed to her knees, trembling violently. Elias moved toward her carefully. Lyra. She looked up at him with absolute horror. It never possessed me. The chamber fell silent. Soren stared at her. What? Lyra's voice broke. It connected with me because I let it. Another pulse surged through the shaft. The alien sphere began rotating slowly for the first time. And deep below them, a massive eye opened in the darkness. Elias froze. The thing beneath Titan was alive. Not a machine. Not an energy field. Alive. The eye alone was larger than entire cities, glowing faintly beneath endless black water far below the shaft. Its pupils shifted upward toward Lyra, toward its vessel, toward its doorway. The prisoners around the shaft began weeping with joy. "She remembers," Merrick whispered. Suddenly, every screen across Erebus activated simultaneously. Earth Fleet Command appeared. An admiral stared grimly through static. "This is Admiral Rise of the Coalition Fleet. All surviving personnel are ordered to remain in place for immediate sterilization." Elias stepped toward the screen furiously. "There are still survivors down here." Rise ignored him. "Subject 0 must not leave Titan under any circumstances." Lyra stared at the transmission quietly. Then the Admiral finally looked directly at her. And fear crossed his face. Not military caution. Pure fear. "You should have died 30 years ago," he whispered. The transmission ended. A second later, the orbital bombardment intensified. Massive impacts shook the prison continuously now. Entire layers of Erebus peeled apart overhead as Earth's fleet tried to erase everything beneath Titan forever. But it was too late. The eye below the abyss blinked once, and Titan's crust shattered. The entire shaft split open from top to bottom as black ocean water erupted upward from beneath the moon's surface. The prison screamed apart around them while gravity storms ripped through collapsing corridors. Elias grabbed Lyra before falling debris crushed them both. "We need to move." But Lyra barely heard him, because something far worse had just entered her mind. Not words, not visions, coordinates. Earth. She looked at Elias with tears in her eyes, and whispered the sentence that froze his blood. "It's already there." First gravity collapse struck over the Pacific Ocean. A cargo vessel disappeared without warning, crushed into a sphere no larger than a human heart. Minutes later, entire sections of Shanghai began floating upward into the sky. Buildings tore free from their foundations, while millions watched the oceans rise vertically like towering black walls. Then came the silence. Communications failed across half the planet. Satellites vanished, and gravity itself stopped obeying the laws humanity had trusted for thousands of years. By the time Elias Vane's emergency shuttle escaped Titan's atmosphere, civilization was already dying. The cockpit alarms screamed continuously as the small vessel tore through debris fields surrounding Saturn. Behind them, Titan cracked apart beneath storms of black methane and orbital fire. And beneath the moon's fractured crust, something ancient was finally free. Elias gripped the pilot controls tightly while the shuttle shook violently. Every transmission channel overflowed with panic. New Delhi evacuation failing. Entire districts missing. Gravity inversion spreading globally. God help us. Then came the screams. The broadcast cut instantly. Lyra sat silently behind him, restrained only by her own exhaustion. Dark veins of light now moved faintly beneath her skin like glowing fractures. Every few seconds the shuttle distorted subtly around her, metal bending inward before snapping back into place. The entity was changing her, or consuming her. Elias no longer knew which. Soren lay unconscious nearby, barely alive after escaping Erebus. Blood still leaked slowly from his ears. The old warden looked decades older than he had only hours earlier. Hours. That was all it had taken for humanity's reality to begin collapsing. Lyra suddenly looked upward sharply. "It sees them." Elias glanced back. "Who?" "The fleet." Outside the cockpit window, Earth Coalition warships surrounded Titan like a steel ring. Hundreds of vessels prepared for another bombardment strike. Then the stars disappeared. Not metaphorically, Entire sections of space vanished into blackness. One of the battleships folded inward instantly, crushed into nothing without explosion or debris. Another stretched unnaturally before tearing apart like liquid metal. Panic spread across fleet channels. What the hell is happening? Retreat. Retreat now. Too late. Dark fractures spread through space itself around Titan. Ships vanished into impossible geometric voids while others drifted upward against physics, swallowed into black tears hanging in vacuum. Elia stared in horror. Space was breaking. The entity wasn't controlling gravity anymore. It was rewriting reality. Lyra closed her eyes painfully. It's fully awake. Then she screamed. The shuttle exploded sideways through space as an invisible force slammed into it. Warning lights burst overhead. Elias fought desperately to stabilize the vessel while Saturn's rings spun wildly across the viewport. And suddenly, they weren't near Titan anymore. Elias stopped breathing. Earth filled the stars ahead of them. The shuttle had crossed billions of kilometers instantly. Soren woke violently beside him. That's impossible. But impossibility no longer mattered. Earth burned before them. Entire continents glowed beneath storms of gravitational distortion. Vast black scars stretched across oceans where cities had vanished completely. Above the planet floated debris from orbital stations and shattered moon colonies. And hanging over Earth itself, a wound in space. Huge. Circular. Alive. The sky looked torn open by claws. Millions were dying beneath it. The shuttle entered Earth's atmosphere through storms of burning debris. Elias guided the failing vessel toward Coalition Command near Geneva, while emergency broadcasts flooded every screen. People floated through city streets. Airplanes fell upward into the sky. Whole mountain ranges collapsed sideways. Humanity's world had become physically unstable. Then Elias saw something worse. The people. Some stood motionless in the streets, staring upward at the fractured sky. Smiling. Listening. The same look the prisoners had worn inside Erebus. The entity was spreading through human minds. Lyra suddenly gasped in pain. Her eyes flickered black for a split second. "Don't let me sleep," she whispered urgently. Elias looked back sharply. "What happens if you do?" She met his eyes. "It won't wake up alone." The shuttle crashed hard into the outskirts of Geneva. Metal screamed apart as the vessel skidded across ruined streets filled with abandoned vehicles and drifting bodies. Outside, gravity changed every few seconds. Rain fell upward. Cars floated sideways. Lightning curved across the sky unnaturally. Elias forced the hatch open. The city looked like the end of creation. Coalition soldiers rushed through shattered streets, while civilians screamed beneath collapsing skyscrapers. Overhead, the wound in space continued widening slowly above the clouds. And from inside it, something massive was trying to emerge. Command headquarters had been converted into a military bunker beneath the old Alps. Elias brought Lyra there under armed escort, while terrified officers avoided looking directly at her. Everyone knew now. Subject Zero. Humanity's greatest mistake. Inside the war room, Admiral Rise stood surrounded by holographic projections of dying cities. "You should have let Titan burn," he said coldly. Elias nearly attacked him. "You caused this." Rise didn't deny it. "We tried to harness it before another civilization could." Another civilization. Elias froze. "You knew others existed." The Admiral's expression darkened. "We found ruins on Mars, Europa, Proxima colonies." He looked toward the fractured sky. "Every species that encountered this thing died." Silence swallowed the room. Lyra stepped forward slowly. "No," she whispered. Everyone turned toward her. Tears rolled down her face. They didn't die. The lights flickered violently. Gravity vanished. Every object in the room began floating upward. And then the voice returned. Not inside their heads this time. Everywhere. "We remember them." Soldiers screamed as their bodies twisted unnaturally into the ceiling. Walls bent inward. Reality cracked open across the bunker. Lyra collapsed to her knees, clutching her skull. Darkness poured from her shadow like liquid smoke. The entity was fully merging with her now. Elias grabbed her desperately. "Fight it." She looked up at him through tears and terror. Then she whispered the impossible choice. "If I die now, humanity survives." A pause. "But if I live?" Outside, the stars above Earth began disappearing one by one. One by one, lights that had burned for billions of years vanished from the night sky above Earth. Not exploding, not collapsing. Erased. Humanity watched constellations disappear in silence while gravity storms consumed entire continents below. Oceans rose into the atmosphere in spiraling black towers. Cities drifted apart like dust across broken skis. And above the planet, the wound in reality continued opening. Commander Elias Vane stood in the collapsing coalition bunker as alarms screamed around him. Soldiers floated helplessly through fractured hallways while walls bent inward under impossible pressure. At the center of the chaos knelt Lyra Vale. Barely human now. Dark fractures of light spread across her skin like glowing veins. Shadows twisted unnaturally around her body, moving seconds too late, as though reality itself struggled to keep up with her existence. And behind her shadow, something else moved. Something enormous. Ancient voices echoed through the bunker. "We remember the first fire. We remember the last sky. We remember extinction." Elias forced himself toward her against shifting gravity. Every step felt like walking through collapsing space itself. "Lyra." She looked up slowly. Her eyes were changing. One still human. The other completely black. "You need to go," she whispered weakly. "I'm not leaving you." A sad smile crossed her face. "That's the problem with humans." The bunker ceiling ripped apart. Above them, the sky cracked open completely. For one horrifying moment, Earth saw what waited beyond the wound. Not a creature. Not a god. A civilization. Or what remained of one. Endless geometric structures drifted through impossible darkness beyond reality itself. Ruined worlds floated in silence around a colossal black mass, stretching farther than human vision could comprehend. Entire species. Consumed. Frozen. Stored like memories inside a cosmic graveyard. Humanity wasn't the first. Just the newest. The entity's voice shook the planet. "We carry the dead so they are never lost." People across Earth collapsed as the voice entered their minds. Millions instantly saw the memories of extinct civilizations, their final wars, dying suns, collapsing worlds. The entity did not destroy species. It absorbed them, preserved them forever inside itself. Elias finally understood the horror. It believed it was saving life. Lyra trembled violently. "It's lonely," she whispered. Outside, entire mountain ranges began lifting from Earth's surface. The planet was coming apart. Admiral Rise grabbed Elias desperately. "We can still kill her." Elias turned with fury. "And if you're wrong?" Rise said nothing. Because he knew. Humanity had already tried violence. And violence had only fed the thing beneath Titan. Suddenly, Lyra screamed. The floor beneath her shattered into floating debris, while darkness erupted outward like a tidal wave. Soldiers were thrown across the chamber. The bunker began collapsing sector by sector. The entity was winning. No. Merging. Elias rushed toward Lyra as reality fractured around them. Through the broken ceiling above, he could see Earth dying beneath storms of collapsing gravity. He grabbed her shoulders. "Listen to me." Her blackened eye stared into him with infinite depth. "There's nothing left of me." "That's not true." The entity's voice boomed through her mouth. "Humanity fears what it be COMES." Elias refused to let go. "You are not a weapon." The bunker split apart further. Continents cracked below. Moon fragments rained through Earth's atmosphere. Still Elias held on to her. "You are not a monster." Lyra's human eye filled with tears. The darkness around her faltered briefly. And Elias said the one thing no scientist, soldier, or government had told her in 30 years. "You were never meant to carry this alone." Silence. For the first time since Titan, the entity hesitated. Lyra gasped sharply as memories flooded back. Not experiments. Not prisons. Human memories. Her mother teaching her to read beneath artificial colony lights. Her father laughing during Earth's final snowstorms. The day she volunteered to save humanity, because she genuinely believed people were worth saving. The darkness recoiled violently. "We cannot be alone again." Lyra cried openly now. "You won't be." The entity trembled inside her. Entire stars vanished overhead. Reality itself balanced on the edge of annihilation. And then Lyra finally understood. The entity wasn't evil. It was terrified. A survivor from a dead universe, desperately trying to preserve life the only way it knew how, by absorbing it forever. But humanity was different. Humanity endured through connection, through sacrifice, through hope. Lyra slowly touched Elias' face. "I know what I have to do." His expression broke instantly. "No. If it stays connected to me, it can remain here." Tears streamed down her face. "But if I take it beyond the fracture." Elias realized the truth immediately. "You'll trap yourself with it." She nodded. "Forever." The wound above Earth widened completely. Beyond it waited endless darkness and the graves of forgotten civilizations. Lyra rose slowly into the air. The entire planet shook beneath her. The entity roared through reality itself. "We will die alone." Lyra smiled sadly through tears. "No." Then she looked at Elias one final time. And for a moment, she was simply human again. Not Subject Zero. Not a weapon. Just Lyra Vale. "Tell them," she whispered, "we were worth saving." Then she ascended into the fractured sky. Darkness followed her upward like a storm consuming the heavens. The wound in reality began collapsing around her, while gravitational fire spread across the atmosphere. The entity screamed. Not in rage. In grief. And Lyra carried it into the void beyond the stars. The fracture sealed. Instantly, gravity stabilized across Earth. The floating oceans crashed back into place. The skies cleared. The remaining stars stopped disappearing. Silence fell over humanity. For several seconds, nobody on Earth moved. Nobody breathed. Then the sun rose slowly over a broken world. Months later, rescue teams finally reached the ruins of Blacksite Erebus beneath Titan. Most of the prison had collapsed into the methane abyss forever. Only fragments remained. Inside the deepest surviving chamber, emergency systems still flickered weakly. An old AI core activated as explorers entered. Its damaged voice echoed through the ruins. Containment failed. A pause followed. Then quietly, but humanity endured. And somewhere far beyond the edge of known space, something no longer felt alone.